People try to attach drama to the Neovim fork, but I think the drama has always come from the users, or not even the users, just like the drive-by sort of Reddit comments, like the people who just want to make drive-by comments and they don't have any insight into either like the fork or the forked project. There's side effects that can happen in many places, and so it's not a nice architecture.
So, first tell me, how did you get into programming in general?
HTML probably is the answer. Well, actually, I did some programming on the TI-83 calculator, which is like a kind of a form of BASIC. And that's where I was messing around with for loops. And I actually made a kind of first-person shooter game where it was like, it gave the impression that you were advancing forward, and then you could turn corners and shoot things.
On a calculator?
But it was it didn't have a game loop. It was very it was mostly a demo. But yeah, at the time, I computers were expensive. I had to buy my own computer by saving up money, and I eventually built my own computer, but that didn't come with any kind of. I was hoping it would come with like QBasic or something like that, because I had heard some people had that. I really wanted it, and there was no way to get it because I didn't have the internet, and there's just no way to get stuff like that in the 90s unless you like knew a catalog to order it from or something like that, but I didn't. But eventually, like a couple of years later, I started going to Linux user groups because this was in Florida, and I don't know, like Rob Limo hung out around Tampa sometimes. I think he was a famous Linux guy back in the day. And one of these user groups demoed a system called Plone,
Okay.
which was a kind of it was a very powerful CMS, content management system, which is like, seemed way more interesting to me than the typical PHP blog thing. Like it was a system that I've always been like super interested in managing knowledge, like the stuff that I find out, you could just call it note-taking, I guess, but since at least 5th grade, I've been obsessed with like trying to find a better way to take notes. LLMs are obviously relevant to that these days. They're kind of the apotheosis of that idea. But anyways, Plone was built in Python. It used an object database called Zope. And the interesting thing about Plone, one interesting thing about it, besides the fact that like you could extend it with Python scripts, it existed before Mozilla, and it was one of the project leaders was a guy named Alexander Lemy, and on the mailing lists, he would advocate for something that at the time seemed kind of epiphanic to me, which is that if there's a problem and users aren't getting it, even though it seems simple, like the developers should figure out how to reposition stuff, like metaphorically or maybe even literally through layout or whatever, or just like fixing the user interface to meet user expectations. And in the open source world and maybe the programming world at the time, like it was much more prevalent to insist like users need to figure stuff out on their own. Like this probably doesn't seem significant these days, because like now, users are worshipped basically by every project. But at the time, this was, it felt revolutionary to me. So I give this guy, Alex Lemy, credit for putting that idea in my head. And that started kind of driving the way that I frame the relationship with users and developers of software. Programming did not really click for me until I touched autocomplete. and this was in Visual Studio. So Visual Studio, I give credit to Visual Studio for kind of really making things click for me.
So
Like
what is it?
objects, like holding the whole edifice of object-oriented programming in your head without being able to see immediate results. That takes a lot of like really just a lot of sweat, like that I didn't have at the time.
Okay. Was this then C or C++? When did you start like
It was .NET. It was C#,
Okay. Okay.
C#.
What
First version of C#.
what year was it?
2000, 2001.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
I was 4 years old then. I'm
Oh,
I'm
okay.
assuming you're a bit older than me then.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I've been around for a while now.
Okay. Then how does your journey in programming world take you from this point to Neovim?
Well, in university, I used Vim. It was the easiest way of getting syntax highlighting at the time. So like there was Nano, or you could like use one of the IDEs, but the IDEs at the time also were pretty hostile to users, like getting the build set up correctly. It was just like it was a big layer on top of all the other stuff. And like in university, you don't really actually need any of that stuff because typically it's just like a one file project typically, or maybe like a header and a source file. But like you don't even really need make. You just are typically invoking GCC on the command line. The IDE actually gets in the way there. So Vim was a welcome sort of tool at the time, and I just kind of just barely learned the basics, like in how to exit, how to edit. It gave me syntax highlighting out of the box, and then it got out of my way. And then, but for years after that, I was doing mostly C# for a long time professionally, and was heavily using Visual Studio, but editing text, especially back then in Visual Studio and any text box in a browser it there's friction there that seems like it shouldn't be there. And that just kept nagging me. Like, so Vim, the Vim acolytes claimed that there was like some big miracle at the other end if you just learn how to use Vim. And that was way more interesting to me than like building another form for work or whatever I was doing. I was kind of like learning Vim just for fun, and started to use it more and more at work. Started to eject into Vim to do edits, and then go back to Visual Studio to like compile stuff. You start reaching for Vim more and more, and you're like, what else can I do with it? And you see that there's some people were doing ambitious things with plugins, and you can see it can do even more than what you thought it could do, and you start to wonder, well, how far can we actually take this? And so yeah, regarding Neovim specifically, this is around 2011, 2012. I had been following the Vim dev mailing lists very closely for years. I was also very active on the subreddit for Vim, and I had a very clear picture of like where the project was going, what the limitations were, what was needed. Async was a big topic at the time. There was a couple different patches around 2013 that proposed this. Bram said clearly on the mailing list that in around 2012 that Vim was basically in maintenance mode, and so and you can look at the commit history also for those 2 years. It seemed like, okay, we were getting a pretty clear signal that this is in maintenance mode, there's not going to be new features because every time new features are added, it causes lots of problems.
Let me maybe interject a little bit. Bram, who died in 2023, I think, was the maintainer of Vim, right? So the captain and the benevolent dictator for life for Vim project, and yeah, and he was not necessarily interested in patching and like more features and developing Vim, right? Is that correct?
At the time, yeah, that was the clear signal that he had given, like literally in the mailing list. He wanted to just make it super, super stable, fix all the bugs, and had been bitten by the conceal feature that ended up causing lots of bugs.
What?
And the conceal feature is it's a feature that allows plugins to hide text in a kind of a very limited way, but it requires maintaining state between that's like so the display is different than what is in the buffer, which has implications for like cursor movement and edits. Like the
Oh, okay.
cursor and the edits apply to the actual buffer text, but what the user sees is not the buffer text. The Vim architecture isn't exactly designed to support that kind of duality very well. And even to this day, like, it's taken a lot of work to sort of shoehorn in more of these virtual features, like virtual text.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah.
So Bram was against adding new features because of the bad experiences in the past, features like conceal, and this was like the main motivation for you to like for the project of Neovim to get started.
Well, it was accidental. Santiago de Arruda, I was talking to him on Reddit because he had shown his proof of concept on Reddit, and he was saying he was thinking about doing a fork, and I was very excited about this. A few other people were, and he was asking me for advice, and my advice was I think it was just around like, you know, positioning, like project positioning and things like that. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, he announced it, and people got really excited about it, and then he decided to do a Kickstarter, and it got way more momentum and excitement than expected. Yeah, and then he asked me to sort of take over the kind of project maintainer lead role a few months later because it became a huge amount of work.
Okay. Okay. So it was not expected to blow up this quickly and this much.
No, and the sequence of events is kind of, I think, critical to how things turned out, because if Vim had not been in ostensible maintenance mode at the time, then there would probably be less excitement for, a fork. And of course, people are always skeptical of forks because for good reason. Like usually forks are just vanity projects. They fizzle out. People think things are going to be easier than they are, or they have like a gripe that is not um, sufficient sufficient fuel to uh, continue a project for as long as a successful fork needs to continue. Like if you just have a gripe, you're not going to be around in 5 years, 10 years maintaining a project. Like if it's just if it's like if you're rage quitting like effectively, then that's not gonna feel things for as long as a fork needs to. Forks are a huge amount of work. Like it's basically like a lifetime sentence, more or less.
But also, like, you want to build on something constructive and positive, right? Like, if you want to build on something that is negative, like, oh, I don't like this, the question is, what do you like that you actually want to do? If all your attention is on the negative aspects, but not on the positive aspects that you want to bring to the world, it will be difficult to rally a feature and support and like sponsors and everything. So you kind of need to build on the positive, right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's a good point. Sponsors are gonna get the ick if your project has the ick. I don't really know what the situation was with years ago. There was a FFmpeg fork, and I feel like it was maybe that kind of situation where there was a lot of drama. I mean, people try to attach drama to the Neovim fork, but I think the drama has always come from the users. Like we have generally, or not even the users, just like the drive-by sort of Reddit comments, like the people who just want to make drive-by comments and they don't actually know, they don't have any insight into either like the fork or the forked project. Um, uh, so it's somewhat up to us to sort of tamper that and kind of dissuade it uh, where appropriate. But yeah, it's good to have zealots. Zealots can be useful too.
Okay. So if I get this right, you at some point, like there were features that you wanted to consider to add to Vim because of the sort of stonewall approach to adding more functionality to Vim. Tiago decided to create a proof of concept, which was quickly sort of like adopted or maybe just popularized. And then people flock into this project, and you were asked by Iago to take over maintenance and the leadership of the project, right?
Yeah, I'm the
Okay.
people person. He asked me to take over the soft work, I guess. He had a lot of like vigor for doing a few different technical ideas. He cranked them out in a few months, followed up with the embedded terminal, which was another pretty ambitious thing at the time that had a lot of second guessing, but ended up being, another kind of killer feature and obvious in hindsight. Like a lot, like one of the main objections to having an embedded terminal is people they don't want their editor like getting out of its lane. They don't want it to have a terminal, but actually I would frame it now as like a terminal is a primitive. It absolutely should be there, just like your operating system has a PTY concept, like that's built into the operating system. Why wouldn't you have a terminal built into every application? It's a pretty tiny component relative to a lot of stuff that is in applications these days. Like terminals are not that complicated. The only thing that makes terminals painful is the terrible state of term info, which is the database that contains the mappings of terminal capabilities to how they're encoded. That's just a big mess. But um, that was mostly solved because Xterm is essentially the standard. Xterm became the standard. It's a quasi standard. Oh, you just really got to support Xterm. That's it. Once RxVT died, finally, I call RxVT the Internet Explorer of terminals. It was just like, it was the oddball out that was making life worse for everybody for no reason. Like there's no good reason for RxVT to have all these different weird term codes.
Can we
And its users are always showing up and saying, this is broken. Yep, stop using RxVT. It's trash.
can you paint a little bit of picture how the world of terminal development looks like? Because for people that are like outside of this world, like we only hear that developing terminals themselves is awful. The term codes are just like mess. They're ridiculous, and like you all deal with like these kind of like UTF kind of byte sequences that you need to parse properly. It's just like a bizarre language.
Yeah, I mean, I think the central problems are that, number one, it's using one channel for two purposes. Like, data is going over the same channel that control signals are going over. So that has to be disambiguated by both ends. And if there's any like mistake in the encoding by the either end, then there's arbitrarily broken things can happen. And also it makes it hard to delimit. Like, you can't perfectly delimit data. So when you paste into your terminal, it's delimited by a start sequence and an end sequence. But that means that actually, if the data being pasted has the end sequence in it, then it will end at the wrong time, like,
Oh yeah.
because it's misinterpreted by the receiver, which is that's a fundamental problem when you're using the same channel for two different purposes.
And X
So
term,
ideally, it would
yeah,
be two different channels.
and X term fixes this. Like X term
Xterm
is
doesn't fix it. Xterm gets rid of the term info discussion, because term info is like this bag of mappings that may or may not exist on the user system. They might be outdated. So when you're reading their system files, trying to get the mappings correct, if they have an outdated file, almost no terminal user even understands that this exists. And they're going to be super confused. And they're going to be like, why aren't things working? Well, we just read your system. And then it gets even worse when you're connecting to a remote system, which might have different term info definitions than the local system. So they see things are working with their terminal locally, but then when they connect to the remote system, that the terminal app on the remote system does not have access to your local system files. So it's reading whatever files are on your remote Linux system. And there's workarounds for this and stuff like that, but like, probably the most reasonable answer is just to kind of standardize around Xterms stuff, because then every app just can hard code Xterms definitions, and it doesn't have to worry about the system definitions.
so X term basically provides sort of a layer and a sensible API on top, and does all the shitty translation below.
Xterm is like Xterm is just the terminal that happened to win.
Okay.
So all the apps can just program for Xterm. It's kind of like Chrome, the Chrome web browser. Like most web apps are made for Chrome web browser, and so they use Chrome as the standard. And later on, Chrome's behaviors tend to find their way into the W3C spec. So that's a nice thing. There is no W3C spec for terminals. So what I'm suggesting is just like apps should use Xterm as the W3C spec for terminals.
Okay.
But the other thing that makes making a good terminal pretty painful is dealing with like performance, because scroll back, like infinite scroll back, and being able to wrap things correctly when you have like a large amount of scroll back, that's kind of an unsolved problem. There's a few different edge cases like that make it hard to make a terminal work well. Mitchell Hashimoto is, maybe you know this, that he's working on Ghost TTY, and he's kind of talking about some of these problems.
Yeah, he seems great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
We
Seems
talked,
like a okay guy.
we talked we started talking about terminal because you mentioned that the embedding terminal was kind of an obvious feature for any editor really, but any application even in more of a general sense. So I'm assuming this was one of the core features in the POC or soon after for the early Neovim, right? What were the others?
Job control, which was referred to as async capability, the ability to invoke a CLI process without having to wait on its result. And Vim did not support that because there were just a lot of assumptions spread throughout its code base that made it very difficult to change that assumption. And Neovim had to deal with this too. Both Vim and Neovim addressed this by kind of just playing whack-a-mole with all the trying to slowly chip away the assumptions and like shrink the band of possible events that can happen. Like so Vim is Vim's main command processor is called normal mode, and during normal mode it can change state, like global state, in a bunch of different ways. And if some user code calls something like recursively back into normal mode, which then changes that global state in an unexpected way, then it's broken. So being able to support asynchronous events kind of adds a new way that that global state can change unexpectedly.
Okay. So this is a good moment to talk a little bit about how a Neovim integrates with Vim. Like what is the boundary? Like how, for example, in Neovim there's Lua support that can interact with the Vim API underneath, right? So how does this work exactly? Like Neovim is a fork of Vim, right? And where is the, let's say, what is sort of architecture like from the very, very high level of Neovim, and how does this relate to the what is underneath like a Vim kernel?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about this. Well, let me answer the first part, which I guess is like an overview of the architecture. Years ago, some students were asking me about this for some university project, and the surprising answer is that there's really only like one limitation, like architectural limitation that Vim has adhered to, which is that everything is represented as input. Like even the commands in Vim script are just more input into the input processor. But everything after that is there's many violations of like what you would hope are concepts that allow you to reason about the system, but it's not really true. Like the one thing that is consistent is that it gets characters and then it processes them. But then when it interprets those characters, they may stuff more characters back into the input processor. But the general like life cycle is like input comes in. It could be user input, it could be script input. Those may have mappings. The mappings can then, recursively do even more stuff. They can be interpreted as Vim script, which is just essentially kind of mappings that may map to built-in functions or built-in edit operations, and then it just does that in a loop. And so the Lua layer is it's part of the dispatch stage. Like things can there is an event loop. I mean, there is an event loop in Neovim and there's an event loop in Vim. It's just that like it's not like a game loop. Like in a video game, usually they have like a game loop where effects can happen, but then everything settles like during a tick, right? A loop tick. That is not really like that in Vim. Like we've been driving towards that because we want that. That's a much nicer model, but it's not rigidly the case. Like there's side effects that can happen in many places, and so it's not a nice architecture. We're trying to make it nicer, and we've been incrementally doing that for 10 years, but it's not pure, and it's not as elegant as we think it can be. Like we're still making progress on it. So the thing that makes it attractive to work on is that we haven't really hit dead ends. Like we haven't hit we haven't been like stopped. It's just we still find ways to like kind of simplify the system and put some more structure around it. So regarding Lua specifically, like Lua is great for embedding. It's a totally self-contained system. It's just like it's this blob of code that you put in your code base. You can just slap it in there, and it has its own concept of state that doesn't like overlap with the state of the host system. So we have like a bridge layer. Mappings and Vim script can call into Lua. Lua can call into the Vim layer, what we call the editor layer. And there is no shared state. So like when things go over that bridge, they are serialized, which is good. That keeps things sane.
So there is a Lua layer with its own state separately from the Vim side, and there is a bridge in between. So you can have a function in Lua that will go through the bridge layer. All of it will be serialized and then passed into the Vim part.
Yeah, data is serialized, but functions are not serialized. Like you can't pass function references. You can call functions, but you can't like pass the function object over the bridge.
Okay. Okay. And this means that entire Vim API is exposed in Lua?
Yeah. Um, one of the challenges of working on this project is kind of spending a lot of time on documentation and thinking about how to present things to users. And the way that I present this is that there are 3 namespaces. There's Lua, VimScript, and the RPC API. Yeah, those are the 3 namespaces. It's just but they're really it's really just one long list of functions. That's how you can think of it. Like it's true that like the serialization kind of requires users to be cognizant of that bridge situation. But in practice, I think I hope I'm not being out of touch here, but I think it has mostly not been a problem. Uh, and it, it it kind of encourages plugin authors to choose one or the other, I guess. But like, it, there's not really much of like there's not really much an advantage of having like heterogeneous sort of plugins where like it's half FimScript, half Lua, and you want to share state between them without doing copies. Like that generally is not uh, something that seems that valuable. And I like I personally think there's advantages to sort of just like doing as much in Lua as possible, like for you as a plugin author, and also for performance reasons.
Okay. Can we then go back to the features or even subsystems that Neovim lays on top of Vim? So, because we just mentioned pretty much the embedded terminal and then the job system, but there are a couple of things, and Lua, like Lua as a language that you can use for scripting behavior. But then there's like the one that we need to mention, which is LSP, and talk a little bit about it, how it happened that it found its way into Neovim. So can you walk me through the implementation, like what it took to make it happen?
Yeah, so LSP, I'm pretty sure that TJ DeVries made the first kind of proof of concept of that and got that we merged it like and at the time both internally and externally there was the usual consternation about whether this belongs in core, but a parallel topic that was happening at the time was like we we still it still wasn't clear like how much we wanted to really commit to Lua as being the primary engine of Neovim. Like that at the time, it wasn't still wasn't totally obvious. It seems obvious now, but it wasn't obvious at the time, especially because not around that time, maybe shortly after, shortly before, I don't remember, but like the new version of VimScript was being developed. So that was another kind of decision that had to be made. Like there's a couple different decisions that could have come out of there. It was like, okay, now we're also going to be integrating the new version of Vim script. Great, I guess. Like, it's another problem that we have to deal with, and it's another like never-ending user confusion topic that we have to have answers for. Can't really give a good answer because it's like, okay, we're doing all this work to add this new version of Vim script, but we're also working on Lua. So, but actually, yeah, Vim 9 script made it kind of, it almost like, it forced me to just do a Hail Mary and say, yeah, we're not gonna integrate Vim 9 script, which is the new version of Vim script. It was a whole new subsystem with all the new problems that would come with that. It's a big distraction for users and for Neovim developers. And like, kind of the positioning of Neovim since the beginning, and also in this context, is just basically take it or leave it. Like, if you don't want it, then just go do something else and we'll see what happens. Like, maybe we make the wrong decision and that's fine. We all can go use the other text editor that's better because we were wrong. I don't mind being wrong. So like, but we do need to make a decision. Like, not making a decision is worse for everybody. And so a way of not making a decision is just to try to do everything all the time. It's actually a really bad way of doing things. But it is often the way that organizations and people try to do things. So regarding LSP, the reason that LSP was worth putting in core was basically it forced us to mature the Lua standard library, like in Neovim, because Lua doesn't come with a standard library, so the host is providing the standard library, which is good. That aligns with like what we need it for, because adding yet another standard library is just another kind of distraction for a project that's embedding a scripting language. So it forced us, it putting LSP was kind of just a dog fooding exercise. Like, that's at least 50% of the value of doing that. But predictably, accidentally, but also predictably, it ended up being another kind of, I think, major draw for users. Is instead of having to go choose an LSP plugin, it's just built into the editor. And it's another one of these things that has serendipitous benefits because it gives us like an answer to a lot of extensibility questions, like linting, for example. LSP servers, a lot of them provide their own linting, and so now we don't have to like figure out a way to add that to core. And using and we are working on support for in-process LSP servers, which means that instead of having to define our own interface for all the features that are already defined in the LSP protocol, we can just reuse what we've already done. And this makes it easy for plugins or users to define custom linting stuff, and they can just use the same old LSP mappings or commands or integrations that they use for out of process LSP servers. Did that answer your question? I forgot what your question was.
Generally about interaction of LSP and what did it took to make it happen. So I understand the rationale now, like having LSP in Neovim helped a lot with the extensibility and a lot of the features that people would expect from a code editor, even like the IDE, right? Like they would come in and expect things to work, and you can have the best of both worlds because you can have like Vim that is like native Vim thing, also you have the IDE style support for development in a particular language if you install an LSP for a given server, right?
Yes, and it just gives you an interface. So Vim had this built-in support for something called cscope, which maybe some people are familiar with, but just cscope was a tool that gave you go-to definition and a few other things for C code bases. And I think maybe
Is it C tags or
no,
C scope?
C tags give you go-to definition, but cscope gave you more features than that. It gave you, like, I think,
Okay.
find references. That was probably the main one, actually, which
Okay.
C tags did not give you find references, I don't think. No. And yeah, a few other things like that. But it was mostly only for C. But the support for this was built into Vim. And then it just had, like, this kind of bespoke interface. Like, there were special commands for cscope. But, like, the concept is generally useful. You don't need it only for C projects. And so LSP just kind of gives you all of this. It's giving you a protocol. Like, it's not the best protocol, but it could be much worse, and no one else won. Like, the story that happens over and over is that mostly, like, when it comes to getting everyone on the same page, which is the central thing that needs to be solved when you want to have a pluggable interface. Like, anything where, like, the real world instances of use cases are, they're each, like, kind of, they have their own little, like, quirks, but you want the central interface, which is your text editor or your IDE. You want the central interface where the user can dip into any of these quirky different ecosystems like Java, PHP. These are all different ecosystems with their own little quirks, but you want to use the same interface to interact with them. So if you want to achieve that kind of thing, then you need to get everyone on the same page somehow. And this didn't happen until LSP. Like, that's just the case. Like, I'm not saying it's good or bad. That's just what happened. There was no such thing. Like, Emacs had something called CDET, which that also only mostly worked for, I think, C and maybe Java, but probably not. So there were all these, like, kind of, like, attempts to add code analysis and a code intelligence interface to different types of ecosystems, but they kept coming up with new names and new protocols, and at the end of the day, like, none of them were, some of them were okay, but, like, LSP is also, it's just a list of names. So now we have a list of names, and now we can map operations to those names. That's all we needed. And so LSP is just that. And then once you add the in-process server capability, it means now you can do ad hoc customizations. You don't have to go build, like, an LSP server that's out of process. You can just write a little function that maps things to the LSP protocol, which is just a list of names.
Why do you think LSP worked out when the other attempts didn't?
Because no one else framed their attempt as solving the MXN problem, like the M by N problem. Where it's like you have this cross product or whatever of different combinations and LSP puts just like a multiplexer or a demultiplexer in the middle, instead of having to have the whole big tangled web of different integrations. Like, it's an integration it's a solution to an integration problem. Like a lot of these, a lot of the, a lot of, a lot of leverage comes out of solving integration problems, and a lot of like treadmill work, like just useless ditch digging work, is just integrating with stuff that isn't going through that narrow waist in the middle, like a, it's a dispatcher, so that you only have to interact with that one interface instead of interacting with
Yeah, because
unlimited.
for for everybody who is maybe not familiar, like LSP defines standard of communication between the code editors and the plugins that language servers for given programming languages. So now you can create a language server, for example, for Go, and each editor can implement and communicate to the same language server for Go in the same structure, right? You don't have to have a plugin for Go for IntelliJ, plugin for Go for VS Code, plugin for Go for Vim. You don't need to have that with LSP because you have a standardization for the message protocol.
And the other thing that LSP solved was the code sharing problem. So code sharing is almost still an unsolved problem in our industry today. WebAssembly is an attempt to do that, but it still has the bindings issue, like, to and from the host system. That still is, I think, like, they're still working on that. So to share code right now in our industry, how do you do that? You can either deliver a C ABI and then have like the consumer do FFI, but there's not too many good ways of generating a C object file. Like, I think Rust maybe supports it, but I don't know if it gives like a stable API. I'm not sure. And Go, I think, can't do it because it has a garbage collector. So your options are C. Like, you can't even do it with C++ because C++, like, it mangles its names or something like that every time you... Is this right?
When you're saying code sharing, you mean like you have one system, let's say one program written in one language, and you want to easily interface with this in a different language.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I guess, yeah, the bindings, like the bindings from C, like C would be probably the most universal way of connecting it.
Yeah. Which means it's not solved because no one knows how to write C. Almost no one. Almost nobody. And so the only way to do it is RPC. And so LSP just kind of like crapped out this good enough RPC spec. Like, it's using JSON RPC, sure, but they also came up with, like, the hello initialization steps that need to happen, and those work good enough. And so just somebody did it. Like, somebody did it. Like, no one else was doing. No one else did it. No one else got around to doing it. They were just doing their own little thing for their own little editor or IDE for this one language. Or IntelliJ, I'm sure, built some very elaborate and sophisticated shareable code for their editor, but it couldn't extract from it. It wasn't extractable from that code base. Like, you cannot run the analysis that IntelliJ provides as a server that any random client can then talk to. So LSP just did it, and it did it in kind of like an inelegant way, because, like Jonathan Blow pointed out, like, once you, like, LSP is basically like a little distributed system that's running on your machine, because now you've got all these like race conditions and like that have to be resolved, but still, it still worked because code sharing is so damn important and valuable and high leverage. And right now, this is the best we have for code sharing. In fact, it's so valuable that actually LSP is now being used for all kinds of random different purposes just to get a shareable artifact. Because once you have that thing that communicates over std.io and it has the initialization phase that any LSP client already supports, it means now you have a basic RPC communication to that shareable code, which in a way that is consumable, at least in a basic form, by many systems now. So it's a code sharing solution.
Okay. I never thought that you can use that to do like arbitrary.
Yeah, you can abuse it.
Passing.
And it's better than there are no other alternatives except for WebAssembly, which I'm hoping will mature soon. And we're still looking closely at WebAssembly in Neovim.
Oh, really? What does it mean?
Yeah, we're keeping an eye on it. Yeah.
Okay. As a protocol.
As a way to deliver plugins, as a way. And the other cool thing about WebAssembly is that it has a permissions model, capabilities-based permissions. So that kind of, again, is giving it's just naming concepts. Naming stuff is so useful. When someone just sits down and writes names for things and says, and everyone's like, okay, fine, we'll do it that way. I hate it, but we'll do it that way. That's way better than not having anything at all.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody will be pissed because that's not the name they would personally choose.
Yeah,
but then
or they found a security hole or
name.
whatever. But
okay. All right. What is UI protocol in Neovim?
So UI protocol is it's just a way of representing the UI as over RPC, or it doesn't have to be over RPC, but RPC is one of the driving targets. And what it means is that any client can present those UI events in the way that the client wants to. So Emacs has something called Emacs client, and that is how it connects to the Emacs server. But it's not using a UI protocol. It's just getting term codes from the Emacs server. Whereas in Neovim, and I think maybe VS Code works like this too. In Neovim, when the client connects to the Neovim server, the server is just sending events in the form of you can think of them as JSON objects. They're message pack RPC objects, but it's the same kind of thing. It's just maps of values. And so if you open a tab, it sends a new grid event that says what the windows are in the grid. And then it says what the lines are in the viewport of each window. So the client gets these events and they're structured, which means they're not in a terminal sequence format or any kind of raw binary format. They're just in a structured format that the client can present them. And this means also that multiple clients can connect to one Neovim server. And you can have graphical clients like GUIs, such as Neovide, and they can do things in their own way. And one of the most valuable things that Neovide does is it makes redraws really smooth. So it really feels fast and buttery smooth when you're using Neovide. And it can do that because it has its own graphics presentation layer, and it's not limited by the things that terminals are limited by.
Instead of a terminal application in Neovim or Vim, traditional Vim that would be like, here are the commands and here is rendering stuff. You have this like client and server architecture, which allows to, first of all, have more clients hooked up to the one Neovim server, right? And then have them displayed to any sort of way, because they get the structured format of what is actually there on the screen right now. That seems like a huge ass feature and a lot of things to develop.
It is a big feature, and I think that it doesn't get it, to me, it's one of the killer features, but it's not something that is celebrated in any kind of like Linux journal article or anything like that. Like you don't hear people like raving about it too much, but it solves like one of the central issues that drew me to the project in the first place, which was that mm, if you want to use it, if I want to use an IDE or whatever, I don't want to have to keep like translating my key bindings or learning new key bindings for every IDE. I just want to use the same like editing model. Like there's no reason that this can't be supported by all these different interfaces. So um, being able to embed Neovim in any of these systems allows allows uh, allows you to take your editing model with you wherever you want to go. And the UI protocol is very helpful for that. So in VS Code, there is a VS Code extension which embeds Neovim, and I can use Neovim as my editor in VS Code. I get all the VS Code features, but then like for all the text editing that I'm doing, it's just going straight to Neovim and then updating the buffer in VS Code. And the UI protocol is very helpful for this because VS Code's UI cannot show whatever terminal UI exactly is being that Vim wants to show normally. So just having the structured protocol gives VS Code the parts that it can use, and then can do useful things with those things and it just ignores the rest.
Okay. So it's not like, for example, in VS Code that you would have a plugin that would remap your key bindings, like sort of Vim motions. It's more that you can have like entire Neovim inside VS Code.
It's just started as a child process, and all of your input goes straight to Neovim. Neovim does whatever with it. It sends back UI protocol, and the VS Code extension updates VS Code as necessary based on the UI protocol. And this is like, I don't know, maybe 10, 20,000 lines of code. It probably could be smaller. The core idea probably doesn't take more than 10,000 lines of code. It's not a small amount of code, but it's way smaller than re-implementing Vim in every one of these systems. And we're going to continue to make it be able to get even smaller. But
nice.
Yeah, that requires more work.
All right. Let's move a little bit into the challenges of working as Neovim developer. Okay, what's difficult on the side of just development, everyday development, adding new features or fixing bugs in Neovim?
Well, I touched on the side effects and the global state earlier. That's still a source of unfortunate bugs. The it's a bothersome thing to think about because, you know, it makes it hard. We have to defend the idea of using this system as a foundation, as a basis for, you know, continuing work. Like, why are we using such a buggy system as our foundation? I kind of I gave a lot of like presentations about that, so I won't repeat all that. But yeah, it's a and we are doing that while development continues upstream in Vim itself, which we still merge patches from. So that's tough. Like, and the way that we are approaching this is that we're deciding which subsystems we want to continue taking patches from upstream for. Like, some subsystems, we're either deleting them or freezing them or taking ownership of them and saying we don't need patches from upstream anymore. And so we're narrowing down the scope of this problem over time. The other big challenge is backwards compatibility is something that we have to weigh against decisions that, you know, if there's a decision that you wouldn't make if you were starting over today, then, you know, if that decision is compelling enough, then we should choose to break compatibility in that case. But so the way that I frame this is breaking stuff when it is really just like things that users might not be used to. Users are applications, they're not systems. Users are wetware. They can adapt. Like, I'm not too worried about breaking just things that they are used to that aren't necessarily like in the long term the best thing. But things that I am very convinced that we shouldn't break is like stuff at the programmatic layer. So we have a pretty good answer now to maintaining backwards compatibility, like at the API level. It's mostly a non-problem now. We just kind of like shovel stuff that is deprecated into like a corner of the code base, and we don't touch it. It's like a nuclear waste site, you know. It's not hurting anybody. It's buried underground, and the people that still need that API will not be bothered, and we won't be bothered because we're not maintaining it. It's just there. There are some like extreme cases like the C-scope integration where we did just entirely delete it because number one, it was Coverity, which is a code analysis tool, was flagged like a lot of parts of it for like, you know, memory access risks and things like that. And just LSP made the C-scope integration just totally redundant. So we decided to delete that entirely. And then, yeah, and then there's more of these kinds of I don't know what you call it, celebrity deathmatch situations where it's like we have the legacy syntax system and we have tree sitter. It's a celebrity deathmatch, and one of them needs to
Okay.
win. And we kind of like have to, you know, we're treading water and we're kind of like still supporting both, but at some point, you know, there might need to be a death match and
Okay.
and one of them might need to die, or something like that. And and then just people management. Like, it's such a big project now, and we have so many contributors that I think that the project in my mind started out as a people project, and that's why it succeeded, but that's also like a pretty hard thing to deal with because you need to keep your developers happy, which means it's hard to keep everyone happy all the time. But that could be just as basic as like making sure their PRs
Yeah.
don't get ignored. But like a lot of times I want these PRs, but also it's hard to like stay on top of all of these PRs. There's just thousands and thousands of them. And
This might be
yeah.
a good moment to ask a question from the audience about what drives the direction of Neovim. What drives the direction Neovim is currently going in? How do lead maintainers agree on the new features to implement?
Well, we have the vision statements and that on the website, and that is intended to give, and we also have in our help documentation we have a a develop section which describes the positioning of the project, and this is intended, these exist to give like like an idea of the project direction. And but then like moving into like how that manifests concretely in terms of like what we're doing this year versus next year versus 5 years, um it's kind of, we have a roadmap, but and if there's like a super emergency, then and no one else is addressing it, then sometimes I will start uh, either complaining loudly and like trying to redirect people, or maybe doing some of the work myself. But there's not, and sometimes that just takes the form of like, I don't know, stopping the bleeding by like doing some hack that like makes the emergency no longer an emergency. And if people are bothered enough by the hack, then they can unravel it later. Um, but usually, actually, like uh, what it seems to be effective, like just based on the last few years, is just writing things down and providing a narrative, like, and saying like, this is the problem, describing the problem clearly, and then saying this is how we could approach it. And if you think that's a dumb idea, then say what's wrong with this, and then we will adjust. But actually, like a lot of times, just framing the problem and writing it down, uh, it seems to be working. That like someone gets interested in it and starts working on it. Um, but the main priorities are usability and extensibility. They have been those two things since day one. And if we were evaluating our current priorities in terms of like how it would happen, like say at my job, my employer or some other corporation, like they might make different choices, but yeah, the things that get done are whatever people actually work on. But like some of these, like the contributors also tend to be very motivated by what users want. So a very high demand feature is a plugin manager, and now we have two pretty high quality PRs in progress that will land in the next release. So we'll finally have a plugin manager, and that is part of this kind of like marketing push that I've been playing around with, which is that this year is we're focused on out of the box experience. You have them out of the box, like just hammering that over and over. So another like, yeah, that's our current priority. And the things that drive that are a combination of contributor interests, user demand, and people actually doing work. Like if there's something, if somebody's actually working on something, that has a much higher priority of landing than something that seems really important, but no one is working on it.
Yeah,
It's not going to happen.
it's a different mentality than projects that happen in organizations like companies, right? Like because then you have like, let's say there is an idea from the top that is kind of sprinkling down, and then at some point there's like a project manager, like somebody's responsible for delivering something, and here like there's far more work than anyone can handle. So depending on like, and you cannot really force any contributor or maintainer to work on something. So the stuff that will get done will be done.
That's right. Although another lever that we have is because we have pretty good funding, like donations from users, we are able to use that funding to fund people to work on stuff that maybe isn't getting enough attention. So a big, like, important topic is removing the press enter dialogue, which has just, it's been like a fixture in Vim for, and maybe Vi, for 50 years or whatever. And we're getting rid of that this year.
What is it, like, what do you mean exactly by press enter?
So because of the way that the messaging system, like user messaging system, works in Vim, it's partly dependent on screen state, and it's partly dependent on the fact that in terminals, the screen, as if you don't do any changes, it'll just, the screen will stay that way. And so like it tries to like define regions where it never, like it won't update unless it really needs to. And so showing user messages is partly based on that assumption that like, as long as a redraw doesn't happen, the message will still be there. But this is, it's kind of like clumsy, and it's not the way you would build a messaging system in a normal GUI. Like normally you would just say, okay, I have a messages area. I don't need to worry about like whether a redraw happens, otherwise the message might get lost. But anyways, so an accident of this kind of like system is that if many messages are sent during one redraw, they all accumulate, and then it bumps up the screen and shows a press enter to continue, which interrupts your flow. But Vim wants to be very sure that you didn't miss any of these messages. So instead of just like redrawing over the message area, which means you could miss some of them, it just stacks them all up and shows a big dialogue, so to speak, that requires you to press enter, which means that any plugins that are just innocently trying to show one line of message, if multiple of those cases happen, but during a redraw or during like one, tick or whatever, then they have to be stacked because Vim doesn't want you to miss them. This needs to be fixed, and it's a surprising amount of work, but fixing that is going to be, it's going to feel like a totally different system, no longer being interrupted by the press enter all the time. Feels totally different. It feels like weird. I still have PTSD from press enter. Like there's things that I do where I'm like, oh, I don't need to press enter here anymore because I'm just used to like hitting enter, like spamming the enter button.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit funding. How does the situation look like financially? Are you stable? Like, are you get enough for the needs of development of Neovim? How does it look like?
Well, I mean, compared to most open source projects, we get a pretty generous amount of funding, but it's still not, it's still less than the salary of one developer per year. So, and that's before taxes. So, we have a few people that we're funding, and it's kind of like they're taking, less than the normal sort of like, developer salary but it's way, it can be really fun and a good use of time just to, if you're like between jobs or you have free time or whatever, just to focus. And instead of like, you know, not having any income for a month or two, you're at least having, subsistence income for a month or two, and you can work full time on a project that you really want to work on. So I love that. I'm very thankful
On
for
that
that.
note, if there are people who are listening to this and they are considering starting helping out in Neovim, what would you say to like first time contributors? Where should they go? What should they do in the beginning? How should they start?
Well, we have a contributing.md doc, and it gives the full story. That's always the place to start. It tries not to be it on like it's very precise. It's not, but it's kind of long, but it's got like it's not just verbose. Like it's giving you only useful information that you need to know. But it has a section at the top that gives some ideas if you don't even know where to start. But if you have something that you actually want to do and want to change, then that makes it easier because you just search the issue tracker, see if anyone has discussed it. If not, you can either create a new issue to at least send up a flare that says, like, this is a topic you're interested in, and make sure that, like, it's something that we consider to be in scope, because we'll close it if we don't think it's in scope. And then just, create some sort of proof of concept PR. It doesn't have to be anywhere close to complete. You can abuse the CI system to just start getting like test runs, and that's fine. Just put the PR in draft. We have no problem with that.
Okay. Okay. Um, you mentioned earlier we talked about UI protocol, and there's one question from the audience about plugins, whether plugins work in client, server, or both sides of Neovim.
Yeah, that's a good question because VS Code has the concept of UI plugins. We have discussed that idea in Neovim, but there is no such thing in it. It introduces, oh, it's probably like the kind of constraint that I was alluding to earlier, which is like you want constraints so that you can kind of not go crazy and you can reason about things. And even though it might seem like attractive, then it might be better just to like solve the harder problems some other way, like because then it allows you to keep the system like simpler. But the the answer is like when there's a client server thing going on and the plugins are running always on the server. Um, so even if you have like a local client connected to a server, there's no concept of of script being evaluated in the client. Um, and then there's like a side topic or a side note, which is we do have the concept of out of process plugins, which are just communicating over RPC. It's nothing like too surprising. It's just you can start a process and then you can use like a tiny little Lua layer in the Neovim plugin layer to call functions on the process. And the process can be written in any language any language really, because it's just talking via message pack RPC back and forth.
Okay. So I'm assuming both plugins can be like influencing both sides of the server and
Both
server and
sides of
client
what?
of Neovim.
Well, the client, like, I would not think about the client at all. The client doesn't just is the client doesn't have its own, there's no ecosystem for the client. The ecosystem is all on the server. The client is just a view.
Okay.
Now, there are GUIs like Neovide and Neovim Qt. They have their own sort of like settings and things like that, but that's all just like custom bespoke stuff. The plugin model is totally related to the server.
And then client renders it. So plugins change what will be rendered on a client, basically.
Plugins do stuff on the server, and the server sends events to the client.
Yeah. Okay. What are your favorite plugins?
Get Signs by Lewis, whose name sounds related to Lua. I don't know if his mom was intending that, but he's pretty good at Lua. Yeah, Get Signs is a very high quality plugin. He's also, I think, he's sort of using that maybe accidentally as a place to test an async layer for Lua. We're thinking about like a structured concurrency story where we have like a task abstraction or something like that, or you can think of it as promises maybe, but it's probably not going to look exactly like promises. Yeah, Get Signs is kind of like, it's very high quality Git plugin. It annotates your buffer and blames lines and things like that. Also Fugitive. I still am a heavy user of Fugitive by Tempo.
Okay. Are there features that are missing in Neovim from your personal workflow that you'd like to add there? Like, do you see some functionalities missing? Because like Linus Torvalds famously said that like for him Git was finished like in 2 weeks after he made like, for him it was like done for his needs, and the same thing goes for Linux. Like he made it in 1 year, he was like done. That's for me everything that I need. And then like 30 years later, Linux is still adding stuff for other people. So are there things for you Neovim is done, or so what are the things that are missing?
Well, for example, you can't pipe commands. That seems like something that I want. I haven't thought too deeply about it, but it seems like a big missing gap. It's kind of, it's pretty awkward to like, have like a series of commands that feed into each other. And similar to like a shell pipe. We have the pager now, which is going to land in 0.12, which is it turns the messages into a real buffer. That's a big deal that I was missing for a long time. I would say like everything on the roadmap is stuff that I
and we
want.
should shout out the roadmap, which is available under neovim.io/roadmap, right?
Yeah. So it mentions multi-cursor, and multi-cursor is significant because it adds, like, when Vim is translating that stream of characters as input, it doesn't really understand the atomization of the input. Like, it doesn't ever really keep hold of the fact that, like, this part was a command or this part was a mapping, and it makes it really hard. So there's no the input is not structured. We have a structured output like UI events, but we don't have the structured input. And so implementing multi-cursor will require addressing that, and then that allows you to have more powerful kinds of, like, macros, and because right now macros are also just a stream of characters that have no structure. Um, Plugin manager and yeah, structured concurrency, I mentioned that. So those are the big ones.
Okay. What would you... I want to ask you about this, like, rise in popularity in Neovim. So more and more people seem to be getting on Neovim train. It seems like the curve is much like steeper than it was in Vim case, at least in my sort of like how I view this. So Vim and maybe Emacs remain kind of like arcane, and Neovim is doing something better in terms of like the user experience, at least for the people coming from outside world. It seems like what would you say contributed to this rise in popularity? And
I think it was a combination. I mean, it's partially accidental, probably, but is I agree with Steve Ballmer that, like, focusing on making developers happy has, like, these secondary effects of then it makes the users happy. Because if the developers are happy, then you get a better result. Like, this is something that I agreed with Bram on a lot of things, but this is somewhere that I definitely strongly disagreed with him. He often said, like, users don't care about what the code looks like, but we care a lot about what the code looks like in Neovim, and we care a lot about the build system and, like, how maintainable the project is, and like how PRs, the review process, and all these kinds of, like, developer quality of life things translate into a better flywheel effect where, you you get more smart people contributing, then you get more problems solved, you get more features, you get more bugs fixed. Like, we have such a huge number of, like, wickedly smart people, um, more than I ever expected. And that's actually what keeps me on the project, is because, like, I want to see what these people are doing, and I also want to keep do what I can to, like, be useful, and also implement things when I can. Um, but the I guess the point is that I'm still interested to see where it goes. Like, I'm not seeing any kind of stagnation, and that is largely driven by the impressive people that are working on it. But, also, obviously, like, LSP, I think, helped a lot. Lua helped a lot, and then social media like Primeagen and TJ also deserve a lot of credit. Like, if they switch to Zed, we might start to plateau,
okay.
which is fine.
Also on the top of other editors, do you pay attention to the like editor kind of market? And
Yeah.
what do you think are the nice features that the other editors implement that you might see in Neovim?
Well, I mean, CRDTs have always seemed pretty interesting, but those are probably not going to happen in Neovim
What is
anytime
CRDT?
soon. And there
What
was
is
this
CRDT?
editor called
What is
CRDTs. Yeah, conflict-free
yeah.
replicated data types. It's like an atomization of edits. It's kind of like it takes the user input and then it represents it as like a stream of edit operations, which definitely fits into what an editor needs. And maybe that'll be the next step after we implement the first phase of multi-cursor, because multi-cursor requires something like that, but it's not formalized like CRDT. CRDT is like an academic thing that allows, I think, like some optimizations and it allows like multiple users, like collaborative editing. But we'll see how that works out for Zed, because I don't know if Zed has a, a big plugin ecosystem yet. But there was an editor called XI, like Chi or something like that, and it also was written in Rust and had a CRDT model, but it the author, I think, wrote a blog post saying that like the CRDTs ended up making it hard to have plugins work with the system's like expectations. So if Zed can figure out a way around that, where writing plugins doesn't require like a PhD in CRDTs, then that could end up being hugely a huge boon for that editor, because you need plugins. Like there's always the very loud kind of drive-by people that say, oh, I just want something that works out of the box. Well, yeah, I mean, because you're an NPC, like you just yeah, go use VS Code and go like use your iPhone and download things from the App Store and pay for them. That's fine. But like there's also like a whole segment of the population that wants to customize every goddamn thing, like to a ridiculous degree, and those people's needs are not being met by VS Code. Like yeah. And so, but there's yeah, I pay pretty close attention to VS Code, and they have some good ideas that I'm definitely advocating for in Neovim. Like, for example, like they have really good support for connecting to SSH systems like easily, and there's no reason we shouldn't have that in Neovim.
Okay. Okay. On the topic of like drive-by comments and people, I think a lot of these comments are stemming from, well, people who are just sort of asking about things but never considering the other side. Like you as a maintainer have a group of people that you're supporting, and Neovim is not like a thing for a single user, right? Like it needs to adhere to a quite varied interests. And some people want this feature, some people want that feature, and like this is like a broad ecosystem. And people have this like mental model that like, hey, in my case, this would be useful, so it should be useful to everyone. And or maybe they don't even do this jump like to everyone. They just like, this would be useful for me. And then like there are other people that have the same thing, but obviously they stand in a different place and would like a different feature that's directly conflicting with the first one. So I think, yeah, Neovim has a tough line to balance between this like out of the box experience and also being heavily customizable. And I think you're doing a fair job at that.
Yeah, thank you. It's yeah, that's why you kind of need like someone kind of like some sort of BDFL role, someone playing that role, because you need like the tiebreaker and you need kind of the referees saying like, yeah, this is out of scope. Like you and you know, so Ethereum had smart contracts. They were trying to make they're trying to kind of like digitize legal ideas. You could think about maybe like a project, maybe digitizing its BDFL someday or something like that, because like that's basically the idea behind like having a vision statement or you know a list of goals and a list of like tenets. So it's just kind of like it's a decision tree for like saying how to like decide whether something is in scope or out of scope.
Does it mean that there's a future on the horizon of LLM-powered BTFL for Neovim where I can go and ask for a feature through a prompt like chat message, and then you get a response from the digitized BDFL powered by LLMs? What?
I'm open to trying anything. I think we're very much into cheap experiments. Like
That's interesting. What you just said. Like, you mean, what do you mean by that? Like, do you do like POC and you're happily shipping this, or what way?
well, yeah, like we try to at least get the interface in a decent state and try to spend less time like bike shedding the internals. So like if the interface is good, like either the API or the user interface or like the basic layout of the modules, something like that, if it looks like something that's in the shape that we can iterate on, then we will try to merge that into master as soon as possible, and we can worry about the details later. Um, yeah, so that's the idea there. Um, but yeah, the implementation a lot of time just doesn't matter that much. So we've been getting better and better at kind of like worrying less about stuff that can be changed later. Two-way doors versus one-way doors.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about the testing and then deploying Neovim? Like, what
Sure.
as a developer you have in terms of tests and some sort of like confidence that you didn't break any of the other subsystems?
Yeah, this is one of the origin stories. This is part of the origin story of the project, which is that at the time Vim had almost no tests. It's hard to
Okay.
believe, but it had almost no tests. And the tests that it did have were like a it was a bunch of like line noise input, and then the output was like some sort of I think it was like a file that represented the X mode like output or something like that, but they were pretty unreadable. And there was only like, a few dozen, like a couple dozen files and maybe like a total of like 100 tests for the entire project. So that was part of the reason why like changing stuff was so painful back then. And so, and also Vim was not on GitHub at the time. So we went on GitHub, we were using CI, like Vim didn't have a CI at the time. So we, um, and this was like this took some time to bootstrap, but yeah, and we have a very good, extremely good, probably better than most people have seen in their jobs, extremely good test harness. Now, every single test starts a new instance of Neovim, like which takes about 30 milliseconds. And we have a PR now that parallelizes that and it saves a couple of minutes, but we have 7,800 tests. 7,800, almost 8,000. And a lot of these are screen tests. So they're testing the entire screen state.
Whoa.
Yeah. And it's pretty usable too, like to write tests. You're not like screwing around with like screenshots or anything like that. It does virtual screenshots of like the grid, which is another place where the structured UI protocol came in handy, is because we have a fake, it's not even fake, we have a UI that's only for tests, and it's a test UI, and it represents the UI as just lines of just a string that looks like a screen, an ASCII screen, and you can write the tests by editing this ASCII screen, and you can say, I want the screen to look like this, and
Interesting.
yeah,
So
like it's so much better than and the other cool thing is, like, we don't use mocks. These are running the real system, the entire code paths. Like at work, I'm constantly telling people, can you, like, if you mock everything, you're not testing anything. People just like, and this is why people love LLMs so much, by the way, now. They can just say, write tests, and just barfs out a bunch of things that look like tests. And then these people say, okay, yeah, great. I wrote some tests. And no one's looking at the tests because there's too much, it's just all mocks. LLMs are great for this.
So, but does it mean that if you change a lot of how Vim looks like, a lot of the tests are now grow like outdated, right? They become
That's true, yeah, and so, like, what we typically do, the way we typically approach this is we do it in phases, where the first phase is, like, we will have some old way to enable the old behavior so that we don't have to change all the tests at once, because we wanna make changes without making people hate life, because we want them to come back and do more changes later, so, like, for the default theme, which is something that landed a year or 2 ago, that would have changed all the tests, because the tests are also testing the highlighting. So we just, in the test harness, we just enable the old default theme, because people still like the old theme anyways, so we needed to keep that around anyway, so most of the tests are still testing the old default theme, which is, it's not that important to update all the tests to change to match the new theme.
okay. So you do have almost 8,000 tests that
That's not counting the Vim tests. We also run the Vim test suite.
oh, you have like special suite for Vim, even though Vim itself doesn't have tests.
Well, it has tests now, but it didn't in
Okay.
2014.
Okay, nice. Uh, that's I think extremely helpful for especially the people that are content fresh in Neovim project and want to do contributions. Some level of confidence that you're not breaking entire ecosystem with your PR.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly why we did that, because it was just so much heartache whenever you change one thing and then there's some cascading effect that in somewhere else that you don't know about. So we've been much more aggressive in the last 5 to 7 years, I would say.
And what about releasing and deployment?
So releasing is just it's a pretty small shell script that just signs, I sign the artifact, or Bjorn signs the artifact if he does the release, but this is all totally documented, and it's just a small script, and it just and CI actually does the publish. So we do the release notes locally, and we update a couple version related tests, and then we push a tag. CI sees the tag, and then it builds stuff and it pushes it to GitHub releases. And yeah, we don't do any publishing to like third party systems, because there's just too many of them. But also, something that I've been insistent on since the beginning is making package maintainers happy. Like, I want to work with the people that are making Debian packages and Red Hat packages. Like, I don't want their life to be hard. I want their life to be easy, especially in the early days when we were the oddball out. We weren't like some big, we like, there was no guarantee that anyone wanted us in their package tree. But still, even today, like, whenever a package maintainer like finds an issue, we want to try and upstream whatever fix they have instead of making them, maintain their own private patches.
Okay. Okay. Then, what would be the most brutal feature in Neovim as far as development is concerned? Like, what caused the most headaches and issues in the past?
Well, probably redraw. Bjorn has done some really great work on the screen composition system and the redraw handling, but there's still some work left to be done there. But then also kind of a source of never-ending bugs is the event system that we inherited from Vim. It did not use that sort of game loop approach where like it sets a flag and then like during the settling phase, then it does all the event handlers. It doesn't work like that. What happens is user-defined event handlers can happen almost anywhere. This has been cleaned up somewhat, but it's still a source of bugs. And so one of the things that user-defined event handlers can do is they can delete a buffer almost at any time. And so there's like C code that like thinks it has a buffer pointer and the buffer's gone. That's not good. So this has been a source of like probably over 100 bugs over the years. Usually Vim fixes them, but then somehow there's always some new one where just like someone deleted a buffer at the wrong time. Or a window, something like that.
On that note, then, is like often in such discussion, then Rust is being brought up as the savior for all sorts of silly mistakes in C. And there is a question from the audience about your stance on the new or modern low-level programming languages like Rust or Zig or Odin. Do you have anything to say in terms of how they seem interesting to you?
Yeah, we've taken a pretty close look at Rust and also Zig, and those are pretty much the only real viable options we have. People mention C++, but it's like that doesn't solve the pointer issues. Sorry. And it introduces a whole like new like iceberg of like developer questions and style questions and compiler flags. And at the end of the day, it's still there's still Zig and Rust like waiting for us. So it's like it's very good that we did not try to switch to C++. Never mind the fact that it's like slow compiles. Like our compile is wicked fast. Our whole system compiles in like less than, on a modern computer, it compiles in 20 seconds, the whole system, including transitive dependencies from source.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're taking a very close look at Zig. We are probably not going to do Rust because the interop story with legacy C and Rust just is not nearly as nice as Zig. And the other thing that Zig has, which is super, super compelling for us, is this like magic cross-compiling story where we can just run it on a Linux box. It can cross-compile to pretty much any target. That's such a nice thing for us. And it means we can start testing on like PowerPC and things like that, which right now we currently don't have CI for.
What is a PowerPC?
PowerPC, I think it's also called S390X. It's an IBM CPU architecture.
Okay.
And MacBooks used to use it, but they are until they switched to Intel.
Okay. Then we'll be heading towards the end of the interview. Maybe in the end, it's good that you bring up like the maybe positive story, because I asked you recently about the brutal features that caused headaches. Do you have in your memory some sort of positive spin or a story with like a happy ending of a feature that would have like a dramatic moment in the beginning and then ended up nicely? Something that you recall?
Well,
Yeah.
the decoupled UI was a pretty big win, that at first wasn't totally obvious, all, like so what I mean by decoupled UI is, like, we used to have a built-in thread that would do the UI in the process as a separate thread, but then we moved to an architecture where we got rid of all the multi-threading, and we always spin up a child process, and so the parent process is the UI client. And people thought this might be slow or unnecessary, but it had a few positive effects. Number one is that it forces us, again, just similar to LSP, it forces us to dog food like that as our main code path. Like the RPC UI layer is now the only UI layer. There's no like special case thread over here where we're cheating. When you cheat, like that's when things fall apart. Like it always seemed attractive at the time, but it's way better not to cheat. It's way better to just have one code path, one single source of truth. This is a constant refrain that we just keep noticing and keeps being kind of gaining evidence for it over and over. And so besides just having that strength and drive bug fixes and performance improvements, like for example, like that drove Bjorn worked on an arena allocator to improve performance for the RPC layer, and now also then a later, we weren't planning this at the time exactly, but like in your chat with the author of Animal Well, he mentioned hot reloading and how that was something that ended up being really useful to him. And so like this also allowed us to do a kind of hot reloading where Neovim can restart the server without like the user having to like go back to the shell and then start things over. And so this removes some friction for plugin development and user config debugging, which is probably the other side of your question, like in terms of negativity. One of the biggest weaknesses probably of these hyper extensible systems is having to debug your config. But if you make bisecting, you could almost automate it. Like, and VS Code actually has a way. VS Code has a feature where they automatically bisect your VS Code plugins that will disable like half of them, see if a problem occurs, and then re-enable half, that kind of thing. And we could do that now too because we have this restart feature. So this was a serendipitous result of the decoupled UI.
Nice. Also, Neovim is on 0.11 now. You work on 0.12 release. What do you plan? Like, is there a plan for 1.0? Like, what would be there for 1.0?
Yeah, it's linked in the roadmap. The plan basically is we're pretty close, I would say maybe 1 to 2 years out. We need to have a clear contract for Lua APIs, and we have mostly figured that out now. And that includes like, how are we going to deal with deprecations? Are we going to deprecate anything at all? That kind of thing. And then there's a couple subsystems that we need to delete before we go to 1.0, because once we go to 1.0, I want to be very serious about like, just don't break people's, don't break anything at the programmatic level. Like we want to, We want things to just continue running forever, as long as it's not like a big burden on us. And figuring out how to make that not a big burden was something that we have been thinking about, and I think we have resolved. And then, yeah, um, there's just a couple subsystems that we need to clean up before we go to 1.0, and then I would say we're pretty close to there. Maybe a couple high risk merges should happen before we do to one, but before we get to 1.0, and by that I mean like maybe structured concurrency, maybe we really need to figure that out and nail it down before we go to 1.0. That might be hard to do in just one release cycle or something like that, but I don't know. That's probably overthinking it.
The idea is more to do it in to make it stable, so that from 1.0 there's little to no changes for the API.
Well, I just would prefer that we can sort of match the spirit of 1.0. I really like the way curl operates. Curl has not made any breaking changes to its ABI for like 12 or 18 years or something like that. And I kind of want us to be there, or at least close to that.
But Neovim is used in many more ways than curl, right? So it's much
Yeah.
more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, only the programmatic layer. Like, we can break the UI. I don't care about breaking the UI.
Okay.
Users just need to deal with it.
Awesome.
If they don't like it, they're fired.
Okay. Awesome. Justin, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing all the stuff.
All right.
Where can people follow your work and you?
I'm Justin MK on Twitter, and my blog is sync.io, and Neovim's website is neovim.io, and Neovim on Twitter.
Okay. Awesome.
And Blue Sky.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone who tuned in. Justin, please stay in the call for a sec after we close out. And yeah, thank you so much for everyone, to everyone who tuned in and was with us today. Have a nice Sunday.
Thank you.